Every night, just before I crawl into bed, I enjoy the treat of a small, red apple. I always end my day by eating the succulent fruit. My mother would always insist that I fill my stomach with a healthy snack before sleeping, and what better snack than a good old apple, she used to say. She was right. There is no better treat than the small red sphere of fructose and water. My bedtime ritual may sound strange, but I do believe it gives me a better sleep, and I always awake feeling refreshed and nourished. I've not missed a day of eating an apple for as long as I can remember. Well, that is until a week ago. I felt a yawn build up in my throat, and so I let it out with an exaggerated sound. It was getting late and I was getting tired, so I knew exactly what I needed to do. It was time to devour my apple and go to bed. I got up off the couch I had been sitting on for longer than I would like to admit and headed over to the kitchen. I walked past the large window that overlooks my fairly large backyard and towards the small wooden fruit bowl on my kitchen table. I looked down into it and expected to be greeted by a shiny red apple. But instead, I saw nothing but the bottom of the bowl. It was completely empty. I had completely forgotten to buy more apples that day, which would have been a better use of my time other than being parked on the lounge. This was the first time that this had happened to me. It would be the first time in my post-infant life that I had not eaten a piece of the fruit before going to sleep. I try not to worry about it too much, but deep down, I knew that my sleep would be restless and unfulfilling. I climbed into bed, my stomach rumbling slightly as I positioned myself underneath the sheets. I closed my eyes and tried to clear my mind and try to give myself the highest chance of going into a peaceful slumber. With my mind blank and seeing nothing but blackness, sleep was about to be upon me. Sleep was just about to extend its hand and pull me through to the world of unconsciousness, when I startled awake by a slight bumping sound. I jolted upwards in bed and listened for the noise again. Another bump sound echoed through my house. This time I heard it more clearly and realized that it emanated from my backyard. I kept listening, hoping that the noise would stop and I could just forget about it, but it persisted and I heard it for a third time. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed to know what it was that was causing this disturbance. I got out of my warm bed and hesitantly and anxiously made my way to the kitchen. My plan was to take a peek out of the window that stared directly into the backyard, and then I would be able to see if anything was amiss. I quietly crept into the kitchen area, cautious of what could be causing the sound. I slowly tiptoed over to the large window and took a quick look out into the yard. Outside, it seemed mostly normal. The large grassed area was still intact, and the long line of trees that ran around the edge of the garden were still and unmoving. The small stone bird bath that stood in the center of the garden was also untouched. There was one thing out of the ordinary in the backyard, though. Standing near the back of the lawn, there was a man. He was staring up towards the window, towards me. His long, white lab coat swayed gently in the wind. Around his neck hung a stethoscope, and across his face sat a thick pair of black glasses. The man was clearly two things. He was definitely a doctor, and he was most definitely lost. When I first saw him, I was more worried for his personal safety than I was mine. I was perplexed as to why he was in my yard, but I was concerned that something bad might have happened to him that led him here. At that moment, I just wanted to help. Around his neck hung a stethoscope, and around his face sat a thick pair of black glasses. I left the kitchen and walked over to the back door that leads out to the yard. I opened it and took one lonesome step out into the garden. The doctor followed my every move with his eyes, but otherwise remained motionless. I looked at him for a moment, still trying to comprehend how and why he was standing on my back lawn. I called out to him just to confirm that he was indeed okay. "Hey, excuse me, are you all right?" I called out in the calmest voice that I could muster. "Do you need any help?" The doctor didn't break eye contact with me, not even to blink, but I still remained mute and frozen. I called out once more and again asked him if he needed any aid. Once I had spoken to him for the second time, I saw a quick flutter of movement from the doctor. His right hand ever so slightly moved closer to the outside of his leg, slightly closer towards his pocket. The small hand movement made me nervous. Maybe because it was the first time I had seen him move, or maybe because he moved closer towards his concealed pocket, which I couldn't see what it contained. I grew anxious, but still tried to remain calm and deduce what exactly was happening. I opened my mouth, readying my vocal cords to talk to the doctor again when I saw his hand quickly reach into his pocket. Before I could react, his hand re-emerged, but now it was holding a large syringe. The needle was long, and it glistened slightly in the moonlight. My brain quickly assessed the danger I was now in and wanted to turn and run, but my body wasn't quite that intuitive. My body stayed frozen for just a second too long. I was just about to run away when I heard a rustling sound at my side and then a white flash of movement. I quickly swiveled my head to see what it was that the corner of my eye had just detected. Coming forth from the trees that run along the edge of my garden, I saw another man come into view. He too wore a long white lab coat and had a stethoscope dangling from his neck. The doctor had wild black hair that sprouted from his head. He was also brandishing something in his hand. It may have been a surgical scalpel, possibly another syringe. I'm not entirely sure because as soon as I saw him, I took off in the opposite direction. I turned to run back into the house, back to safety of four walls, but as I spun around and faced the door, I saw another doctor. This one was inside. He was standing just behind the back door, waiting for me to re-enter the house. I rapidly adjusted the direction I was heading in and ran along the side of the house and towards the small stone path that leads to the front yard and towards the street. I turned the corner at the edge of the house and began to sprint down the cobbled pathway. I was halfway along it when I saw a fourth doctor step out onto the path from beside the front of the house. In one hand, he held an apple. This doctor, also dressed the same as the others, took a step towards me, tossing the apple into the air as he did. He caught the apple when gravity returned it to him, and then smiled at me. It was a cold smile, like he was enjoying giving a patient some bad news. I looked behind me for the means of escape, but saw that the other 3 doctors were closing in on me from that direction. I was surrounded and had no other option but to face the doctor holding the apple. I looked back towards him and watched as he inhaled sharply and took in a big sniff. He then started to speak. "I've just tested your blood, and I'm sorry to tell you that it's not good news. I couldn't detect any scent of apple within your veins. And you know the saying," he said emotionlessly. I didn't respond, as I was too frightened and confused to react to what was happening. After pausing for a second and waiting for me to fill the silence, he realized that wasn't going to happen and so continued to speak. "It's a bit late for this now," he said as he gestured towards the apple with his head, "and one of these a day would have kept us away." As he finished talking, I heard a noise from behind me, and so turned my head around to see what it was. I immediately saw that it was the other 3 doctors advancing towards me. I instinctively moved forward to avoid them getting any closer, but in doing so, I moved closer to the 4th doctor. I was still looking behind me, and so didn't see that I had walked directly into him until I felt myself bumped straight into his chest. I then felt cold hands wrap around my shoulders and a strong grip hold me so that I couldn't move. I spun my head back around and faced the doctor that now had me captured. I looked directly into his cold blue eyes and begged him to let me go. "Please," I stammered. I don't understand what is happening." All 4 doctors began to laugh at the same time, and I felt the presence of another 3 directly behind me. I didn't know what else to do, so I decided to fight. I had to fight. It was the only option left. I swiftly swiped my hand at the doctor who was holding me. My nails scratched across his pale cheek, and I saw 4 deep gouges in his skin appear. Normally, the scratches would fill with red blood, but his didn't. The skin was wounded, but no liquid emerged from beneath his flesh. He looked down at me, no emotion on his face apart from maybe slight disappointment. I then felt something sharp enter my neck, and everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious for, but I awoke sometime later and discovered myself in my bed. My initial thought was that it had all been a dream. but then I felt something wrapped around my neck. I looked down and saw the stethoscope that was placed testing on my nape. I then noticed the white lab coat I was wearing. It was identical to the coats that my attackers were also wearing. I panicked, as I was thoroughly confused by what I was seeing. Had they just played a cruel and dangerous prank on me? Had they scared me and then dressed me up as a doctor too? No. There had to be more to it than that. And there was. Those events all took place a week ago. And since then, I haven't been able to remove my lab coat and stethoscope. I mean, I physically would be able to take them off, but I don't want to. I can also smell other people. Not their perfume or deodorant, but their blood. More often than not, though, it is tainted with a repulsive smell of apple. When I smell someone's blood who is pure and not ruined by that stench, it makes me hungry. Maybe I crave it because I am missing my own. I cut myself shaving the day after I was attacked, and to my surprise, no blood seeped out of the wound. I then decided to prick my fingers with a sewing pin, and again, there was no blood. I think the doctors drank my clean blood and it somehow transformed me into one of them. I have no other explanation as to what has happened to me, but I have a feeling that they will return to me. I think they will come back. And then we can go and hunt.
Good evening, everyone. Giggles the Croupier here. Just wanted to thank all of my incredible patrons for supporting me. Tam B, Jen Miser, Skymara Ravenswood, Melissa Perez, Bernard Jackson, Leaf Ninja, Roy Larimer, Mr. Creepypasta, Neon Scoundrel, and William Delphin. I'm still figuring out rewards for Patreon, but if you would still like to support, click the link in the description and I will hopefully have something for you soon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.
I know it sounds crazy, but please help me. I've seen so many people find help here, and honestly, this is my last resort. Everyone I know has told me that I'm crazy, that my pregnancy is going to my head, and that I'm perfectly healthy. Every doctor has brushed me off as a maniac, but I know it. I know I'm right. I, a 32-year-old female, have been married to my husband, Jake, a 31-year-old male, for 5 years. We dated for 3 years before that. He's been the most perfect guy ever. He's charismatic, wise, has the most gorgeous smile ever. We lived together, and about 8 months ago, I realized I was pregnant. Jake was way more excited than me, and I remember him taking me into his arms and telling me that being a dad was all he ever wanted. I was excited too, of course. We've been trying for kids for years, and honestly, I was beginning to think it would never happen. The news was like a gift from God, if you believe in that. Anyway, ever since, Jake has been taking care of me. He's been extremely careful about everything. He makes every single meal. He is extremely gentle with every touch, and overall, he treats me like a queen. The problem began when he started to get a little more restricting. When I wanted to go out with friends, he was always there with me to make sure I didn't do anything stupid. When I wanted to exercise, he would refuse. When he would tell me that could hurt the baby. When I drank anything, even water, he had to make sure he was the one pouring it so I didn't sneak alcohol in. He always wanted me in bed, watching TV, staying online, and sleeping. Oftentimes I would refuse and insist on some alone time to go out, but that made him unusually angry. He would scream at me to stay put. He never had a temper before this, and I think the repeated yelling is what drove me to insanity. So while he went to pick up some groceries, I snuck out. I know it sounds crazy. Why does a grown woman have to sneak out of her own apartment? I went to my friend Mia's house for some fresh air, and since Jake had the family car, I ended up walking. She lived in our neighborhood, so thankfully it wasn't that bad. I turned off my phone, knocked on her door, and readied myself. It was the first time I've spoken to anyone without Jake around since my pregnancy. She and I talked, laughed, danced to music, and played games for what felt like hours. Eventually, though, I had to go home. Mia drove me back, and the drive could not have been shorter. Jake was, of course, furious. He questioned where I was, what I did, and why I couldn't have taken him with me. He pushed me against the wall and called me so many names. I remember him gripping onto my throat with such force. I could barely breathe. My vision was blurry. I began crying. He demanded I go to the doctor's office the next day to ensure that the baby was healthy. I begged for him to let me go, and he eventually did. He was in shock at himself, and he avoided me the rest of the night. The day after, he apologized. He told me he was angry and that he never meant to lash out. And stupidly enough, I forgave him. He took me to the hospital to get checked. Nothing was out of the ordinary except for the fresh bruises lining my neck. And then something unexpected happened. The man I fell in love with resurfaced. It was like everything changed that night. No more yelling, no more anger. Every time he hands me my drinks or my food, he gives me the sweetest smile. It's like everything from the past few months have been nothing but a nightmare. My perfect husband came back. But something even weirder has been happening lately. And this time, it's with me. I'm so tired all the time. I can barely move my body, and I sleep for almost 18 hours a day. I wake up, and Jade feeds me some food and gives me something to drink. I watch TV, stay on the phone for a bit, and then I fall asleep again. I've been typing this single post over the span of a week, and I'm so glad he hasn't noticed it in my drafts. I know a lot of people are sleepy during pregnancy. I know motivation for things can go away randomly, but this? No one should be sleeping the entire day away. I've read so many articles and nothing expresses tiredness like this. It feels artificial in a way. I don't know if that makes any sense. Typing this out has been exhausting, and I'm only praying these words are coherent. Additionally, the baby's been kicking, and something about it feels off, unnatural. You know how they say a mother always knows? Well, I know something's wrong. Sometimes I feel something beyond kicking in my stomach. It feels like claws scratching my inner belly, and the pain wakes me up at random intervals. Jake has gotten so used to me waking up screaming that every time I wake up, he's sitting on the edge of my bed, glass of water in hand. It's been like this for the past few weeks. A few days before I started writing this post, when I was awake, I demanded to go to the hospital. He took me, but the doctor said nothing was wrong. The baby was healthy, and so was I. The blood work I requested came back normal. I voiced my concerns to my doctor, and he looked at me as if I was clinically insane. He told me physical pain and tiredness is normal. He doesn't understand. Jake has been heavily monitoring my texts and notifications these days, so I can't really tell my friends much. Even if I did, I feel as though they would... I feel as though they would laugh it off. I tried talking to my husband about it, but he simply stated that this is normal, that I'm just going through a hormonal change and it's taking a toll on my health. But it's more than that. I swear. He's poisoning me. I swear the thing brewing in my stomach is not my baby. A mother knows, and I know it. I'm going back to sleep. I'll edit this post when I wake up again. I hope someone can give me some advice. Any recommendations help. I fixedly stared at my computer screen as I carefully listened to the voice from that YouTube video like my life depended on it. I listened again and again, telling myself it couldn't be possible. Surely it was just some random person with a voice that just so happened to be very similar to mine. Or perhaps I was just getting nervous and my paranoia was tricking my senses into hearing something that didn't correspond with reality. I listened one final time. It was about 2:30 a.m., and I desperately wanted to go to bed. But I had to make sure or else the intrigue wouldn't let me sleep anyways. Yep, now I was convinced. No, I was positive of it. As absolutely nonsensical as it seemed, the voice from that video was none other than my own. Heinrich's Gaming Room. That was the name of the YouTube channel. Heinrich was indeed my name, in fact. I visited this channel because YouTube's algorithm recommended it to me out of nowhere, and I thought it was cool because it had my name and had videos featuring many video games I was familiar with. I was your average 19-year-old college student still living with my parents in Germany. But I wasn't a YouTuber. I admit I had fantasized with the idea several times, especially when I was a young teenager in middle school, but I've never had the sufficient means nor the dedication to pull it off. I had a YouTube profile that I used to subscribe to channels that interested me and maybe leave a comment from time to time, but that was it. So where in the world had this channel come from? As far as the actual content that could be found on Heinrich's Gaming Room went, it mainly consisted of gameplays, as its name suggested. Namely, they were video games from the mid-2000s to early 2010s I had grown up playing. Most of them were games made by the company Nintendo, as I had primarily owned their consoles during my childhood, as opposed to my friends who had always leaned more towards Sony's PlayStation. In regards to their quality, the videos weren't unmatchable per se, but they certainly weren't stellar either. The voiceover that accompanied the gameplays especially ticked me the wrong way, and not just because it was literally my voice, but also because they were done in broken English with a comically exaggerated German accent that almost made me think the channel was trying to be some sort of parody. I could speak English way better than that, I thought. By that point, I was so exhausted, so I decided to call it a day and go to bed. The next day, I checked the mysterious channel once again, and to my surprise, a brand new video had been uploaded as recently as a couple minutes prior. It was the continuation to a gameplay series in which my doppelganger played Yoshi's Island DS, an unfairly overlooked game for the Nintendo DS, which is actually a sequel to the critically acclaimed original Yoshi's Island for the Super Nintendo. Alright everybody, we are going to continue playing Yoshi's Island DS. We are going to pick up from where we left off the other day at the start of World 2, said an all too familiar voice in its characteristic German accent. They then continued playing the game normally, making a few unremarkable comments here and there, until they said something that sent shivers down my spine. Funny story, I first played this game back when I was 7 years old, and I bought it from my good friend Dieter. He actually sold it to me for €2 in the middle of the school playground. I still have the original box for the game, and it still has Dieter's name written on it, the voice said before letting out a light chuckle. My body trembled in shock as I listened to the voice in disbelief. It was true. All of it was true. I still remembered that day as if it had been yesterday. I remember how Dieter almost got caught by our teacher trying to sneak the game inside the school. I remembered how he wanted to sell it to me because his grandmother thought all video games were compatible with all consoles, so she bought him a Nintendo DS game even though he had a PSP. I remember Dieter's name written on the game's box. Just to make sure, I went to check the drawer in my bedroom where I kept my old toys and video games. There it was. The very same box containing the game Yoshi's Island DS. It had faded considerably with time, but it could still be seen. On the back of the box was a name written in blue marker, Dieter. One side of my brain instructed me to stop watching. It would have been the most comfortable option, but my curiosity prevailed. I needed to keep watching. I needed to know what was going on and figure out who this imposter was. Before advancing to the next stage, I want to go back to World 1 because one of my subscribers commented on the previous video saying I had missed a red coin on a previous level. The imposter explained. It was then when I decided to check out the comment section to see who was watching those videos, only to find there were no comments, no views, no likes, nothing. And it's not like they were disabled or anything. I could leave a comment if I wanted to, and yet there were no comments. I checked his other videos, and the same was true. No one was watching this, so what in the world was he talking about? Alright, guys, we've reached the end of the episode, but before you leave, I want to make a special announcement. Our next gameplay will take a bit longer than usual to come out because tomorrow I'm going to be organizing a special live stream to show my gratitude for all your support. I'm going to show my face for the first time ever, so I hope to see you all there. The voice announced before ending the video. You can bet as soon as I jumped out of bed the following day, I checked my phone to see if the live stream had begun. Not yet. The channel's most recent video was still the one from the previous day. I'd subscribed to the channel, that way I would receive a notification as soon as the stream would go live, so I decided to just go about my day normally and wait until the notification arrived. My parents went shopping later that evening, leaving me home alone. It was then that my phone finally notified me. The live stream had begun. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my special live stream. The voice greeted their audience, which only consisted of myself. That's right. I was the only person watching that live stream. Judging by what could be seen on the recording, they were apparently outdoors, standing in what looked like a garden. A suspiciously familiar garden. Now, I see all your comments begging me to reveal my face, but first, I wanted to take you on a little tour and show you my house. They said before they moved their camera to focus on a house located right in front of them. My house. I frantically looked out the window trying to spot them, but the garden was empty. They weren't there. And yet, the live stream clearly showed them, standing right in front of my house. I continued watching on my phone as they approached the front door of the house and entered the building. Once again, the stream clearly showed them opening the door and stepping inside a house which looked identical to mine, but I didn't see or hear anyone opening any door outside of the live stream. So yeah, welcome to my house. Here we have the kitchen, the living room. It's nothing special, but it's home. The voice said as they walked around an exact replica of my house. I checked every room and every corner of the house in an attempt to find them, to no avail. Alright, my dear subscribers, I'm gonna head to my bedroom where I normally film my videos, and once I get there, I'll finally reveal how I look like, they announced, once again speaking as if plenty of people were watching them even though I was the only spectator. I simply stood inside my bedroom with my eyes glued to the phone, horrified. I started hearing them. Footsteps. Someone was approaching my bedroom. And here we are. Welcome to my bedroom, the voice said as they opened the bedroom's door, and this time, I saw it open too. But inexplicably, I could not see them. I could only hear their footsteps and watch as the door opened and closed seemingly on its own. Look at me! Aren't I beautiful? The voice said as they filmed a terrified 19-year-old with a phone in hand staring towards the camera in horror as I screamed to the top of my lungs. The next day arrived, and I got out of bed excited by the splendid reception my livestream had received. There were hundreds of comments from my subscribers congratulating me on how successful Heinrich's gaming room was becoming. Wasting no time, I quickly got to work and began recording my next gameplay video. I don't want to keep my loyal audience waiting, after all. When we first married, Jackson was the primary person in my life to push me to try new things. Bungee jumping, tours to the Grand Canyon, monster truck shows. I mean, he really was just wild when it came to activities. The same was true when it came to food. I'm pretty sure that in our 5.5 years in this town, we've been to every restaurant here. Thai, Indian, and even some Scandinavian place that's pretty out of the way. He's a free spirit, and I love him for it. But there's always been one thing consistent in our relationship. He's not a huge fan of spaghetti. I remember I invited him over to my place when we were still dating. I offered to cook, and he sounded excited, saying that nothing I cook could possibly taste bad. Stuff like that. As soon as he entered the kitchen and saw the spaghetti on the table, I saw his face fall slightly. He still ate it, but I could tell he just wasn't into it. I was beating myself up about it at first, but I found that no matter who cooked it or no matter how good the presentation was, he just never cared for spaghetti. It wasn't a vehement hatred, he always said. If you have squid ink pizza and spaghetti set in front of me, I'll probably eat the squid ink pizza first. And it's always been true, until recently. We make it a tradition to eat at every new restaurant that opens in our town, so when Spaghetti Teddy's opened on Main, I spent days bugging him about it. It wasn't until I reminded him of his Google review streak that we finally went. It was your typical Italian-American restaurant, pictures of rosy-cheeked chefs on the wall, those red and green plastic cups, and tablecloths that were somehow sticky despite the restaurant being new. Jackson grabbed one of the menus, and I saw his face screw up. As the restaurant's name implied, spaghetti was the only thing on the menu. I ordered a standard spaghetti and meatballs for the both of us and watched with unwavering amusement at Jackson's waning enthusiasm. The food was finally set down in front of us, and I pursed my lips. Mediocre. Looks like this one is another dud, huh? I said after the first bite. Jackson didn't say anything, and I looked up at him. He was crying. Like, actually crying. His shoulders were shaking, and he was sniffling, and he looked up at me while tears streamed down his cheeks. "Mikey," he began. "This is what I've been looking for," he said, wiping his cheeks with his sleeves, "for my entire life." He let out a sob that startled me. I stood up from my seat and placed a hand on his shoulder, but he shook it off and continued to shovel forkfuls of lukewarm pasta and bland sauce into his mouth. I sat back in my seat and watched in awe. He didn't say a word on our drive back home. I asked him if he was okay as he climbed into bed. He just stared at me for a minute before smiling and saying, "I've never been better, Mikey." The next day was Saturday, and I woke up to find that Jackson had gotten up before me. It was rare that he ever did, since he wasn't a morning person, and I came downstairs to find him at his laptop. "You're up early," I said, and Jackson didn't respond. His brows were furrowed as he scrutinized whatever was on his screen. I moved into the kitchen and asked him, "What are you feeling for breakfast?" as I grabbed a coffee filter from the cabinet. He started, finger moving over the mouse wheel rapidly. "I'm good actually, honey. Thanks, though." He stayed rooted to the computer chair all day and didn't get up until dinner rolled around. He stood up from his laptop and grabbed his keys from the tray on the counter. "I'm heading out to Teddy's," he said and closed the door. I didn't pick up my jaw from the floor until I heard the car pulling out of the driveway and moving down the street. It continued like this for a while and became more frequent, too. Jackson would spend hours on the computer after work and all day on it during weekends. He never went out on walks or offered to take me to some obscure bagpipe concert he found online or anything. He ate Spaghetti Teddy's at least one meal every day and, oddly, stopped going to the bathroom as often as he should. He started wearing the strainer on his head a month or so after our first visit there. I thought he was just joking at first, but then he didn't stop wearing it. He just walked out the door with it one day for work, and I had to do a double take. I ran out the door after him and told him that he'd forgotten to take the strainer off. He smiled at me over the top of the car and said, "I'm not afraid of what other people think, Mikey," and got in his car and left while I stood bug-eyed on our front porch. It kept getting worse over the next few months. Eventually, Jackson wouldn't eat anything but spaghetti teddies, and around town I started seeing them, people with strainers on their heads. Spaghetti teddies got more and more popular to the point where the line would be out the door and onto the street. Because of this, it meant that Jackson would spend hours waiting in line multiple times a day for mediocre, lukewarm spaghetti. I know what you're thinking, but honestly, I couldn't do anything to stop him. I tried convincing him to eat something, anything, but he just pushed it away. One night, when Jackson was down on another pasta coma, I snuck downstairs to his laptop. I've never been one to invade his privacy, but I can't bear to see him go on like this. I opened his laptop only to be met with a lock screen. He'd never needed one before. It's always the "I got nothing to hide" kind of guy. I swallowed and tried my name, and then my birthday, and then his birthday. I typed in Teddy's for the last attempt, and sure enough, it worked. His desktop was just filled with folders and documents, and his search history wasn't any better. Words like Pastafarianism and flying spaghetti monster were littered throughout his history. He'd been on forums talking with other people who'd found the light and were looking to disentangle themselves. I looked at these documents spread across his desktop, and it was more of the same. Manifestos and hymns, all to this flying spaghetti monster. I shut his laptop and tried to stay quiet as I climbed back upstairs to bed. Jackson was still sound asleep, but I was wide awake for the rest of the night. I noticed his stomach when he got into bed the other night. It was bloated and bulging, and he got into bed with a wince. And then it hit me. "Honey," I started, placing a hand on his thigh. "When was the last time you used the bathroom?" I asked tentatively. Jackson just shook his head. "I can't do that, Mikey," he said. "My body is a temple. I need to ensure it remains full and pure." I shot him a look. "Jackson, no! Get up and go use the restroom right now. This isn't good for you," I said, feeling like I was scolding a child. He shook his head. "Didn't you hear what I said, Mikey?" He was irritated now. "This temple, I can't taint it," he stated. I blinked at him and looked into his eyes, searching for signs of joy, but all I found was cold determination. I nodded and slowly turned. Time dragged on slowly after that, and I watched as Jackson grew sicker and sicker with each passing day. Jackson had been withdrawn before, but soon he'd stop talking to me completely. And I swear I could hear him muttering words like heretic and false worshiper under his breath. He stopped going to work and spent most of his days on his laptop or at Teddy's. He started sleeping on the couch, too. Last night, I decided that I'd had enough. I went downstairs to Jackson to find him at his usual station in front of his laptop. I stood next to him for a moment before shutting it on whatever he was typing. He looked down at it for a while, and then looked at me. I had never seen him like this before. He stood abruptly, and I took a step back. "Why did you do that?" he asked, drawing closer, and I struggled for an answer. "You're not yourself anymore," I said as I backed past the staircase into the kitchen. Jackson smiled all teeth and said, "I've never been more myself, more alive than I have been these past few months." He crossed into the beam of the kitchen light, and I saw him for what felt like the first time in a while. His eyes were sunken and bloodshot, like the strainer on his head was covering his matted, unwashed hair, and his stomach was bulging in a way that looked painful and just wrong. I felt tears well up in my eyes as his smile dropped into a scowl. "I'm about to be reborn. We all are," he said, spreading his arms out at his sides. "And you heretics will live in our world or perish," he yelled. What happened next happened lightning fast and slow at the same time. I saw something in Jackson's stomach shift, and he pitched forward. The strainer on his head clattered to the ground, and he let out a howl of pain. I gathered myself from my fear and ran to his side, but he pushed me back with a force that knocked the wind out of me. I watched as he writhed on the ground, his groans of agony turning into laughs of ecstasy as his stomach pulsed and burst, ropes of pasta and blood, intestines splattering across the floor. He continued laughing, and then heaved as more pasta shot out from his mouth. I stood horrified and grieved as my husband's limbs stretched, brown skin turning into a pale yellow. He looked at me one last time, and for a moment I saw him, the man that I married. Jackson had loved everyone and wanted to try everything, but then the light died from his eyes, and he was reduced to nothing but a pile of pasta and gore. I burst through my front door at the same time as one of my neighbors. She was a teenager, no older than 16. She screamed at something in her doorframe and then flinched as she was covered in stringy bits of blood and pasta. Behind me, a wet slithering caught my attention. Whatever was left of Jackson's corpse was alive, and it was coming for me. I looked back to the girl only to find her struggling on the ground, tendrils of pasta coming to wrap around her neck. The tendrils behind me pulsed and lunged, and I jumped out of the way. I leapt over them back into the house to get my keys and nearly tripped as I ran back off the porch to the car. I got in and started it, my bare feet pushing down on the gas pedal as I peeled out of the driveway and away from my home. It was chaos outside. People clutching their stomachs and bursting from the inside out, masses of pasta slithering across the sidewalk and strangling whoever was in their way. I kept driving, and then I saw it. Long, thick ropes of pasta stretching across the asphalt and leading into one building. Spaghetti Teddy's. The pasta tendrils burst free from the building, and I swerved as they came from my car. I pressed harder in the gas and sped through what was left of the town, eventually making it out onto the highway. I stopped to get gas and decided to type this out for anyone who wanted to know what happened to my town. There's nothing left. Nothing from my life. Nothing of my husband or my friends. I'm all alone. And it's all because of Spaghetti Teddy's. We would sometimes see him by the shore, Icarus undrowned. A hand, a foot, a curl of hair frozen by time. Probably as much that sailors used to see mermaids. It's been said that one of us locals gave the ghost its name. Likely a teacher type because of its pretentious tone. The ghost's name had been based on that myth about the boy Icarus who flew too close to the sun and ended up drowning in the sea. The second part of that ghost's name had come from the god named Prometheus, who had been bound to a rock to have his insides feasted on by a bird. Being punished for something I can't remember. Prometheus had eventually been unbound by Hercules. If not that, he would still be chained to the rock. His innards eternal delicacies, like the fried chitlins my granddaddy is still probably feasting on in heaven. Man, he loved those. But this Icarus undrowned we have haunting our stretch of the Gulf is said to be the ghost of a young man who died about 10 years ago. A swimmer on break from college who had lofty ambitions of swimming in the Olympics. A young man who had gotten too bold or too crazy and had, like a lunatic, tried to swim the bay during riptide. The purple flags of warning would have been beating the air like the sun beating down on Icarus, melting his wings as he went higher and higher. But there was no plunge seaward for our Icarus. He was already in the water when it began. So Stemmy and I went out again to the stretch of the beach where you try to see the hints of this fallen would-be Olympian. Kids were getting closer and closer to that industrial storage facility out there. It was said that the ghost liked that area, especially because of the size and the scope of the place was some kind of metaphor for all the ghost's ambitions while he was still alive. You could see those tall and almost equally wide sheer buildings from miles off. The fencing was pretty elaborate. It had multiple metal levels topped with a particularly menacing layer of barbed wire. We thought we'd one-up those other kids by climbing over and into a fenced-off area of beach close to the storage facility. What we picked to climb over was a smaller sort of wing to the larger facility, but we half expected to be stopped by a security guard when we climbed over. Toting our lunches in our book bags, the other half of us was not expecting to be able to scale that thing. But the multiple levels of fencing helped us, and we were able to find grooves and climb it and even get over the barbed wire. I cut my ankle a little, but Stemmy was unscathed. As we made our descent, he joked that we were training ourselves for a life of crime in case our other plans didn't work out. We got down in the sand, bracing ourselves for being caught immediately or spotted on a security camera. But it was just us and the beach that we could tell. This smaller, less conspicuous area was exactly what it appeared from the outside. If anything, it seemed it was a part of the actual storage facility. I nudged Stemmy and pointed to some containers of mainly the cylindrical variety stacked up on each other. Those containers poked their noses up over the intervening fence of the main facility. I didn't remember being able to see them from the outside, but maybe it was something that could only be seen once you were over this fence. "What do you suppose are in those?" I said. "Far as I know," Stemmy said. "They store steel and other metals here." "Those containers don't really look like they're for metal," I said. "Maybe they hold waste products for somebody. Seems like it'd be a violation this close to the water, but who knows?" Still peering around for security, we made our way towards the ocean. We'd hopped a fence into private property to get a better spot on the beach to sight a ghost, but at the end of the day, we were just kids on a lunch break from school. It's not like we'd really broken into anything, and we weren't playing hooky. One of the advantages of going to our high school is that you can have lunch at the beach. As long as you're a junior or senior, something I like to brag about to my cousins freckled across cities in southern Alabama. We made our way to a ridge and a large log that was so sun-dried it felt like a rock, and took our sandwiches out of our book bags. I thought about Prometheus from that myth bound to that rock of his, and how the only thing I was bound to do was eat this sandwich in my hands. I try not to think of that bird feasting on Prometheus's innards. "Hey," Stemmy said, peeling back the bread of his shrimp po' boy from the deli we had stopped at on the way. A pickle and a little of the spicy orange-red sauce splattered on the sand. "Just as I thought," Stemmy said. "They skimmed on the shrimp. Gonna have to catch me a fish and put it on here." "Did you bring a pole?" "Nah. Then you're not going to be able to catch any fish and put it on there." I was thankful I had ordered their flagship sandwich, which, funnily enough, was called the flagship, and above the salami, ham, turkey, real crab meat, and all the veggies and condiments was pierced with toothpicks holding up little red flags. There was plenty of meat on here because it was supposed to be their best sandwich. We set to eating, watching everything around us as we did so. The shore was about 100 yards downslope from our log on the ridge. It really did feel like the kind of log folks should sit on if they wanted to see an Icarus undrowned. Driftwood and pieces of an old boat and its engine dotted the shore. The cerulean sea was marbled with foam, and I thought those waves couldn't get to the shore quickly enough, how they tumbled over each other to break. Coming from the fence line bordering the facility was a man dragging something long and heavy and all bagged up in black trash bags. Probably 70 yards down from us. My first thought was that it was a storage facility worker hauling something down to the water to get rid of it. Almost as soon as I thought, could there be a dead body in there? The man, probably in his mid to late 40s, turned his head towards us. It was a hard, burning gaze, the kind Mama would have said could turn a pig right into fried bacon. "What's his deal?" Stemmy said. "Could be a dead body in there," I whispered, giving voice to my thought from earlier. "Do you think we should run for it?" Stemmy said. "No," I said. "There's no way he's dragging a dead body in broad daylight." "Come to see a ghost and see a murderer instead," Stemmy said, chuckling. But he was breathing hard. Stemmy was short and very thin, which is where I supposed his nickname had come from, but he breathed sometimes like he was heavy-set. He claimed he didn't have asthma, but I don't know about that. And it seemed his tendency to make light of harsh situations, like how he had tried to laugh his way through Mrs. Juniper croaking on us mid-quarter, laughing respectfully, mind you, well, seemed that had its limits. It's something else in there, I said. Can't be that. But the man dropped the end of the heavy burden he had been dragging, advanced quickly up the shore towards us, sand arcing up behind him like a Grim Reaper's scythe, and raised an arm. A gun. It was a black handgun, small enough to conceal but large enough to pack both a punch and a kick. Stemmy's breathing did double time. I couldn't get enough air myself. We weren't here, Stemmy yelled at the man. Quiet down, Stemmy, I said. I wasn't ready to die before I'd turn 18. You quiet down, he said. One of us has to take the initiative. He rose up from the log and put his hands out in front of him. I had a premonition, an image of the gunman mistaking Stemmy's rising hands for having his own weapon. A smoking hole through Stemmy's brain, a brain that was working on getting itself a scholarship to the University of Alabama. He was planning on becoming an engineer. He said he'd start by fixing that lopsided bridge in our city. Stemmy was bright, and good people didn't deserve to die, especially not so young. Neither, I figured, did I. When a loud noise erupted, I winced, the kind of wince that shut off every sense in my body. But it was the booming of the man's voice. Hands by your sides, he said. Don't say another word. Come over here and walk in front of me. Hurry, or I'm gonna get an awful lot of blood on those sandwiches. You can put those down. You'll eat them later. The man with the gun, which was soon to our backs, hurried us down until we were waist deep in water. The salt bit, and though it was springtime, the coolness of the water made me shiver and gnash my teeth to keep them from chattering. At some point, he told us to turn around and face him. You're probably very nervous, the man said. I am too. I didn't plan on killing a couple of kids today. You're not going to let us go? I said. What's the point of following your orders? Stemmy said. Would you think I was just bringing you down here to knock your memories out with the back of my gun? You don't have to kill us, too, Stemmy said. Maybe you had your reasons. Maybe it was an honest fight. And if it wasn't, you could just turn yourself in. What you walked into, the guy said, is bigger than me. I'm not even the one who offed this poor fellow. I'm just the one bringing down the body. If I don't, things are going to get out of hand. Is it because of the ghost? I said. Because of Icarus undrowned? He shook his head, training the weapon on Stemmy's face. It was in this way that my premonition from earlier was getting ready to happen. Smoking hole through my friend's brain. My gut ached. I felt a weird sense of humiliation at the relief that I might get to die second rather than first. Kids like you, the guy said, are supposed to be outside of business like this. It's grown person business, and only for a select few. You should have heeded the no trespassing signs. Should have listened to those cautionary stories about the ghost. Well, here's a bit of adult wisdom coming at you. Though I can't see how it'll do much good now. There are things worse than ghosts out there. Like the people who are paying me to do this and keep it quiet. Same people who own this facility. Same people who would have bad things done to my family if I don't cooperate. I gotta placate them bigwigs, and we gotta placate what was born from their sins. The one day we didn't, about 10 years ago, that was a day of blood and reckoning all up and down this side of the coast. It was a day that took a lot of money and dead on top of dead to fix and keep shut away from the rest of the world. You see, some of us grown folks associated with the facility had been taught the rules for redeeming what we'd put in the water for years. Back when we could get away with it. But we didn't heed those rules at first. Sort of like how you didn't heed those trespassing signs. I'm sorry, kids. You don't know how sorry I am.
I got kids of my own.
I expected, wished for, a smart aleck remark from Stemmy's direction, but he'd gone quieter than I ever remember him being. I had closed my eyes in anticipation of a murder I was too cowardly to try to stop. The sea behind us sort of rose up, as if it also were anticipating the coming violence. The gun fired. Seeking an image or two before my own light was snuffed out, seeking a last visual memento of my murdered friend Stemmy as his body sank beneath the water. What I saw instead surprised me. Stemmy was still upright. The gunman was tangled with someone else in the surf. It was a young man in a competitive swimmer's outfit and goggles. But the tint of his skin was all wrong, all grayish green, and there was a growth coming out of his body and extending down into the waves. The more I looked, though, the more I understood that the swimmer was the one coming out of whatever he was attached to. And whatever it was the swimmer was extending from, by way of a slick, darker green stalk or tentacle, its darkness stretched on and on beneath the surface of the water. It was larger, I was sure, than a whale. Here, then, was Icarus undrowned. Someone who should have drowned but had not been taken, not by death, but by something in the water. Taken and changed and vilely preserved as he was shackled to something that should never have been. Become the agent of an unearthly hunger that could only be placated through communal sacrifice. The swimmer savaged the other man, rending the other's skin with his overgrown nails, taking his gummy face and plunging it straight into the man's abdomen, tearing into him like a predatory beast born from civilization and yet apart from it. Screams polluted the air. Someone else would notice. They just had to. But Stemmy and I stood frozen and alone, bearing witness as the swimmer took the other, still screaming and dropping blood and giblets of meat, out over the waves and down, down, and away. Stemmy and I ran up from the shore, climbing up the fence and over the barbed wire so quickly that by the time we got down there, we were dripping our own blood over the sand. And we didn't stop running until after our bare feet began to be scorched by the concrete of the parking lot. Only then did one of us have the courage to finally reach into a pocket for a cell phone and make a call. There was a dead body and trash bags still there by the shore. And we could think of no sane and truthful way to explain how it got there, or where it had been going. I found this blog while trying to find a good place to buy things on tour. The title of the blog was Looking for Eden. After some light Googling, I found pieces of the post to be true. The guy's name was Kendrick O'Neill, and he was active just over a decade ago, and apparently he kidnapped and experimented on about 200 people. He flat out murdered 60 people, but supposedly returned 140 people to the streets, and yet the police were only able to gather 6 witnesses. Anyway, this stuff is crazy. Tell me what you think. January 3rd. Another failed subject. I reached across the examination table and turned off the audio and video recorders. I let out a long-winded sigh before removing my glasses and pinching the bridge of my nose, trying to suppress the oncoming headache. This had been the 9th one in a row to not come back, and it was starting to get harder to pick up test subjects. The local police were starting to notice the disappearance of the local homeless people, but it was a big city and there were bound to be more. I would just have to start going out further. I transferred the cadaver to a mobile gurney, which I used to transport them to the furnace. I had managed to pick up 3 subjects earlier tonight. I couldn't bring myself to call them people because if I did, then I was no longer a scientist trying to prove a radical theory. If I thought of them as people, then I was, in fact, a murderer. The 3 subjects were all huddled up together for warmth under an overpass, blissfully ignorant of their surroundings as they were obviously high as kites, with drool running out of their mouths and their heads lulled back and eyelids half open. They didn't struggle much as I moved them along into my rather warm service van. Only when I went to pick up the tiny women did I have any issue. She fought back admirably, but I tased her and she was left unconscious in the back with her assembly. Once I returned to my lab, I immediately began working on the bigger of the two men, as he would be the biggest problem if they were to come to. I followed the procedure, but was unable to bring him back after expulsion. The same with the other man. I began to wonder if the fact that their bodies were corrupted with the drugs, that it might play a part in why they weren't coming back. So I decided to call it a night and let the woman sober up so I could conduct the experiment again tomorrow with a cleaner subject. I will keep you updated. January 4th. I'll get right into it. It worked. She recognized the symbol. I had to play loud music through some headphones to drown out her pleas, but I managed to get her to the examination table and strapped down. I tried not to look at her eyes as I began to attach the heart monitor and charge the defibrillator. Her fear was tangible and it broke my heart, but this is something that I needed to do. I need everyone reading this to understand that I am not a monster. I don't enjoy the things that I'm doing, but they are necessary. I need to know. The world needs to know. I turned on the audio and my video recorder on the table across from me, and then I stopped her heart just as the tears broke in my eyes. Once that heart monitor was letting out a single consistent note and reading 0 beats per minute, I knew it was time to uncover the symbol. I made my way to the corner of the room and grabbed the corner of the tarp covering the patch of floor, and in one swift motion, I yanked it away, revealing a triangle with the number 8 inside of it written in red spray paint on the floor. I counted down 35 seconds on my watch and covered the symbol back up with the tarp. After the 3rd jolt, I was expecting another dead body, but on the 4th one, her eyes shot open and she began sucking in breath. I was amazed. I couldn't believe it. I gave her a few minutes to come to terms with what had just happened, and then began to question her. I asked her if she had noticed the symbol in the corner of the room, but she was very intent on screaming obscenities at me, and I let her until her voice was raw and her throat, I'm sure, was very sore. And then I said, "If you answer my questions, I will let you live." She seemed more cooperative after that. She told me she saw the entire room from the ceiling and did in fact see me uncover and recover the triangle with an 8 inside of it in the corner of the room. She described the symbol in perfect detail. This could be the beginning of something huge. I left the girl right where I had found her and the others. I left her with all the baggies that her group had collectively and $200. With any luck, she would be more interested in getting high than going to the police. January 9th. I've picked up another 10 subjects since my last update, and I just finished with the last one. I have had 6 more successful returns. Allow them to sober up before proceeding for more accurate results. And 4 of them had seen the symbol. The other 2 had different stories. One said he found himself inside a pit with a giant red talking cat that told him stories in a language that he didn't understand, but somehow knew the meaning of. He said the cat told him about himself, his entire life story, all his ups and downs, and even things he either forgotten or suppressed, and just as the cat was getting to the part of the experiment, he woke up on the table. And the other subject said he saw nothing. One second I was expelling him, and the next he was waking up on the table. I guess there's bound to be outliers. I left all the survivors where I found them, only slightly more sedated, and with what I found them with, and $200 each. It wasn't much, but hopefully they could get some hot food on me for their participation or get high and pass out under another overpass. As I was going over my research notes, I found myself absent-mindedly caressing the locket around my neck. I pulled it out to look at it and was shocked that the pain was still just as raw and unyielding as the day I had lost her. The locket was in the shape of a heart, rose red with a golden outline. I opened and stared at the pictures inside and began to cry. On the left was my late wife, who died in childbirth. On the right was my daughter, who had died no more than 6 months ago. She died of leukemia. As a chemist working with cancer cells and a research grant that could have bought me an apartment building, it was my job and my unique responsibility to stop such things from happening. But no matter how hard we tried and no matter how many experimental trials I had put my little girl through, I still had to watch as she slowly faded away. After she died, I became a wreck and started losing myself. Until I had an epiphany. What if she wasn't gone, but just lost or moved on to another plane? And the hope that my little girl and maybe the love of my life were still alive in a way had carried me through to this point in my life. February 3rd. Since my last update, I've run my experiment another 60 times with varying results. So far, I've had to relocate to another city and change my vehicle twice, and have narrowly escaped detection with 3 homeless people sedated in the back of my van. Yet my experiments are still consistent and have yielded promising results. It seems that out of every 10 subjects, the averages are 5 who recognized the symbol, 3 who didn't return, and 2 who did return but saw either nothing or a very vivid hallucination. And my current success rate is about 53%. The police are already on high alert due to my current notoriety and have a detailed description of my face. But that bothers me little. I never expected to get away with this. As long as I can complete my experiments, I'll be fulfilled. When I first started this experiment, I thought I was going to need at least 1,000 subjects, but with these results, I think between 150 and 200 will be enough to get a substantial baseline. February 27th. This will be my final update. The police now know my identity and have issued a warrant for my arrest. But I did it. I can't believe I did it. I proved that human beings have a soul, and that when they die, it doesn't just wink out of existence, but is transferred to, well, somewhere. It doesn't really matter where. My little girl, my wife, they're alive somewhere. That they aren't rotting in the ground, being left for worm food. They still exist. I can't see them or hear them or talk to them, but just knowing that they are out there somewhere brings me comfort. It also brings me clarity. I am a monster. I've tortured and killed people for an entirely selfish purpose. Sure, the world might one day know of my experiments and their results, and it might help bring peace to people knowing their loved ones are still alive, just in another form of existence. But those ends do not justify the means. I have directly and indirectly killed around 175 people. Sure, some 140 people woke up and were returned to where they were found, but so many of them took the money I had given them and then overdosed. I know my daughter and my wife would hate me if they knew what I had done, and yet I'm still not sorry. Knowing that they can hate me is enough to keep me happy. But at the end of my experiment, I only wish I had had the courage to find out for myself and left the world guessing. But I'm ready now. I'm ready to move on to the next stage of life, so this will be my final entry. All of my research notes and audio and video logs will be posted in a link down below. Please do not attempt to recreate this experiment. It has been a plight against mankind and should have never proceeded. Because even though I have found my wife and daughter, I have lost my humanity. The skinny man with wild hair hit the post button and then sighed aloud. He pulled a heart-shaped locket off from around his neck and stared at it for several minutes. The pain he felt was etched across his face. But there was a certain comfort in his eyes. He whispered to himself, "I love you both so much." He reached onto his desk next to his computer and grabbed a syringe full with light brown liquid. He stabbed the needle into the crook of his arm and sunk the plunger all the way. He continued to stare at the locket as he slowly started to slump forward and eventually fell out of his chair, dropping the locket and causing the glass to shatter and the 2 hearts to break apart. The man let out a long, continuous breath as that comforting glow faded from his eyes and was replaced with decisive fear before the light was gone entirely. The last entry after the final update was not written by Kendrick. It was posted to the blog not as a post or a comment, it was just under the story, seemingly picking up where Kendrick had left off. It also has no date stamp as all the posts and comments do, so there's no telling when it was posted. Ken had been found dead in his home from an apparent heroin overdose. He was found on March 5th, 6 days after his supposed suicide. I couldn't bring myself to watch the videos. I'm not as curious as some of you might be, so I really don't have an opinion on this. All I know is the guy murdered a bunch of homeless people and drug addicts. And until I read this, I had never heard anything about it. Just wanted to share this and see if anyone else has heard of it. It happens the same every year. All the houses in the neighborhood don their yards with skeletons and spooky lighting, carved pumpkins, paper cutouts of bats. They dress their properties up with just as much enthusiasm as the kids in their costumes, all for the sole purpose of basking in the spirit of Halloween. The house 2 doors down always goes all out. Strobes, inflatables, artificial fog, the whole 9 yards. It attracts kids from all across town, serving as some kind of meeting point for the trick-or-treaters. With pillowcases slung over their shoulders and plastic jack-o'-lanterns in their hands, they start their proud march, every princess and zombie trying to get the biggest haul of their life. Every year, I turn off the lights and pretend I'm not home, sitting in front of the TV with my dog for the annual marathon of slasher films. I'm a bit of a Scrooge this time of year. I don't really decorate my house. I don't even pass out candy. The street bustles with the combination of laughter and screams, each child and teenager trying to make each year more memorable than the last. From the darkness of my home, I catch glimpses from the window on the commercial breaks. Everything seems festive and normal. All except the house across the street. I didn't notice it at first. The house across the street is abandoned, almost derelict at this point. It was a modest loft house before it went unkempt, with a little garage and a big stretch of porch to walk up before you hit the front door. There's a rocking chair on one side of the door and a window on the other. I imagine it would have been a nice setup back in the day. Nice fall day, sip some cider on the covered porch in the rocker, hear the television from the open window. Now, the windows are boarded up, the garage door sits lopsided on its hinges. And there's so many old twigs and leaves matted on the porch roof, it looks like it'll cave at any second. The rocking chair sits empty, dust and mold collecting over the years. No one's lived there for a long time. I don't even think it's on the market. It remains its old, weathered self all year round, and everything seems fine. But as trick-or-treating comes to a close, that changes. I have it narrowed down to the last 20 minutes. Every year, from 5 to 7, the kids go up and down the street raising hell, hopped up on sugar and the Halloween spirit. The old house stays dark and quiet almost the whole time. But at 6:40, that porch light kicks on. In the flickering light, a little orange bowl appears in front of the door. A few feet away, the rocking chair is no longer empty. There's a clown sitting there. His getup is crude and old, like an alcoholic uncle threw on a cheap jester one-piece. The eyes are closed, but the eyelids are painted cartoonish eyes, staring at you while it sits perfectly still. A rusty kitchen knife held in its frozen hand. A little paper sign is stuck to the door, and in big red letters, it reads, "Take 1." I've never seen anybody physically set it up. It's just there. 1 minute it's dark, and the next the light is on. It's almost like someone ran up when you weren't looking and propped the stuff up as a gag. But I've never caught anybody, never seen anybody in the act. It just happens. The thing is, that little orange bowl, it's loaded to the top. Not with dollar store candy either, king-size bars. The first time I thought maybe the property owner was trying to give back for having such an eyesore year-round. Or maybe a homeless guy was trying to have a little fun, scare the kids, that sort of thing. But it shows up every year, and it's exactly the same every time. The same scuzzy clown, the same candy bowl, the same written sign. The most unsettling thing is the window by the door. All year the windows in the house are boarded up. But when that light kicks on, that window's open. No boards, no nothing. The faded drapes on the inside sway in the night breeze, but that's all you can see. It's pitch black when you look in there. There's just that stupid clown. There's just that clown with his painted eyelids in the open window. People started to go missing. Articles in the paper would show the next day some kid or teenager wouldn't make it home after going door to door looking for candy. Every year without fail, there would be a new face to look out for. I would think of the house across the street immediately. But the strange thing is, I seemed to be the only one to see it. The porch light, the clown, the bowl of bars. I talked to some of the neighbors and everyone thinks I'm crazy. It got to the point where I called the police. I was sure they'd kick down that door and find a body or at least some evidence. Maybe bones or clothing, something. I called to them twice. Twice they came out and they searched the whole house. And they found nothing, absolutely nothing. No human remains, murder weapon, not even footprints. Like nobody has been there in ages. They tell me next time I cry wolf, I'll get a ticket. This year, at 6:40, I watch from the window. The light kicks on and they're there. Clown, bowl, paper sign, open window. I see some kids coming down the street, both dressed as animatronics. They look tired and ready to go, but they see the light. They go to the door. They see the giant bars. They jump with excitement. They read the sign. They look at the clown. And they wait for the jump scare. But he just sits there with a knife held limp and a blank painted stare. Each of them pick one, but there's a longing as they look at the bowl. It seems like their conscience got the better of them, and they leave without succumbing to greed. Heading off the porch, they pass a teen in a hoodie and skull face paint. He pushes past rudely, almost knocking over one of the kids. They seem upset, but don't look back. They don't notice the clown behind them. The painted lids raise, revealing staring, bloodshot eyes. This year, I pass out candy. I turn on my light and I'm out with my bowl, waving the kids over, waving them to safety. The eyes on the clown look at me menacingly, like a warning, but it doesn't last long. The teenager is stuffing the bars in his pockets, as many as he can hold. I show the kids my bowl of suckers, tell them the haul's over, to take as much as they want. They're ecstatic, too happy and focused to look back at the slowly standing clown. The teenager leaves, and arms of nothing but bone shoot through the open window. One grabs his arm, and the other planting a hand over his mouth to silence. The clown is there in an instant, eyes wild, the knife digging deep, stabbing over and over. The kids take handful after handful. I show them the silly paint I put on, and if I have to, I'll ask them about their costumes. The teenager fights, but it's over as soon as it started. The clown stabs and rips, the old blade stabbing crudely. The arms are already pulling him in. His screams blend with the others in the distance. My eyes tear up and the kids get worried. I dump the candy in their bags, trying to stay joyous. My hands are shaking, but I play it off. I call my dog to the front door so they can see the silly spider costume I made him wear. Their laughter drones out what they don't want to hear. The clown grabs the teenager by the ankles and helps the skeletal arms, pushing him into the dark abandoned house. He leaves the knife sticking from the torso, arterial spray staining his ratty costume. And when the feet are sucked in, he slams the window shut. For a moment, he looks at me. His stare is cold and terrifying, but I don't look long. Across the street, the porch lights shut off, and it's all gone. I still feel the eyes on me, but there's nothing there. Other houses seem to take it as their cue, and one by one, trick-or-treating comes to an end. The kids grin with their heavy bags and wave goodbye, going back the way they came. I'm left at the front door, and the air is suddenly chillier. I look at the porch ahead, and I almost swear I can see him still sitting there in the dark, but when a car passes, the headlights show an empty chair. I take my empty bowl and shoo my dog inside, realizing I'll either have to do this again or move. At least I have some time to figure it out. Happy Halloween. Until next year.